Hey Latchkey kids and driving mutants, I'm Lady Shasha, Mistress of the Snark, and I just watched Kuntilanak, a Netflix original. This takes place in Indonesia and centers around a creature from Southeast Asian folklore. This opens with a father and a son and a mirror, a very haunted, creepy looking mirror. The son has recently lost his mother, and the Kuntilanak actually impersonates his mother to get him to come close to her, and then she abducts the little boy into the mirror. Then we cut to another family where a woman has recently adopted 5 children. Kresna is the eldest boy, Dinda is the eldest girl, Panji is the middle little boy, Miko is the youngest boy with glasses, and Ambar is the youngest little girl. And they are all the cutest kids you would ever want to see. But the lady who has adopted the children is taking a trip to San Francisco for a few weeks, and she leaves them in the care of a young lady who is a college student. The young lady's boyfriend notices that there's a broken mirror in the house, and so he brings the mirror that he found at the home of the first family to this new home, and that's how they end up interacting with the Kuntilanak. By the way, the boyfriend's name is Glenn, and the way his face looks, he reminded me a little bit of Duff Noodles. There's like, I would call them like kid scares because they aren't really, I mean, this movie is listed on Netflix as a horror family comedy. So when the mirror's head moves and the rocking chair rocks by itself and the ghost lady appears, it's not all that scary, but it is entertaining. There's some scenes that were happening to the kids that I kept on having to ask myself, why is this little girl so brave in this situation? At her age, I probably would have ran away screaming. This happens several times. Another child sees the ghost lady running behind her in the mirror, and she doesn't really react in a way that I would have. I guess maybe I was a super scary child. Like, children are different. Some children are more brave, but I guess I must have been a super scary child because that would have scared the daylights out of me. There is a whole scene in this that is pretty much a shout out to Poltergeist. And just know that in this year, 2021, if your TV has snow, it's definitely haunted because TVs don't have snow. There's some other scenes where at first my mind was like, the Kuntilanak definitely ripped off Kayako, but it's possible because she comes from Southeast Asian folklore. She may be older than, or I should say, Kayako might have been based off of her. I really like the scene of the ghost lady singing and dancing. I thought that was very creative, and I just really liked it. It was different, but it was still a little bit creepy. I loved the child actors in this. They were so good. Their faces were so expressive, and they acted with their whole bodies. The locations and the sets looked great. There's a scene where there's pretty much like a storm happening on the inside of the house, and it wasn't scary, but it just looked great. The CGI effects were so-so, but I kind of like the creature design. The kids are the star of this movie, and there were times where it kind of had a feel of like the Goonies or the Monster Squad or even The Gate, but the scares were slightly more potent than in those movies. This movie seems like it would almost be too scary for kids. A really cool thing about this is, as I watched it, I did look up more information about the Kuntilanak. It's an Indonesian legend that dates back to the 1700s about a pregnant woman who lost her baby, and she has really long fingernails that she gouges people's bodies open and eats their internal organs. I thought that was a really cool legend. Then I found out this is either a remake or a sequel to a movie series called The Chanting, in which there's 2 sequels, but they're not streaming anywhere. I wish they were, because I would love to review those as well. But for what it's worth, I really enjoyed Kuntilanak, and I think that if you want to have a movie that you could watch with your kids, I think this is a good movie because there's nothing that would be seen as too much for children. Like, there aren't any sex scenes. There is a little bit of cursing. That's one of the funny things, is the youngest daughter, who's like barely out of toddlerhood, maybe she's 4 years old, she curses like a drunken sailor, and it's so cute. But don't go in this expecting to be super scared, because you're not really going to be very scared by this. I enjoyed myself watching it, and with that, I will be back in a moment to talk to you about Kandisha. Welcome back. Let's talk about the Shudder original Kandisha. This takes place in France and also features a Bloody Mary / Candyman style character that comes from North African and Middle Eastern folklore. Shout out to the pretty black girls that this movie opens with. I love to see that. I didn't like some of the racialized humor that the kids were talking to each other with. I didn't get it. Maybe this is a thing. Maybe it's a new edgelord thing that the youngins do, but for me, I was like, how could these be your friends if they're making these type of racialized jokes? it was not for me. And speaking of racialized language, they kept calling each other stuff like Arab or Blackie. Is this a thing in France? Or was it this movie's attempt to try to make them seem like they were edgier teens because they did graffiti artwork? Racism isn't edgy in 2021. This was written and directed by Alexandre Bustillo and Adrian Mori, who brought us À l'intérieur, aka Inside. So they're capable of making really great horror. Just consult some people of color next time when you're writing this script on how we speak to each other. Because the way the dialogue was written in the first 3 minutes of this movie was very off-putting. It almost gives off the impression that you only had people of color characters because maybe the producers made you and this was your way of acting out by putting these racialized lines. I mean, it's not a good look. I really hope that wasn't the case, especially not in a movie that takes from the lore and the legend of a person of color. Kandisha, the titular character, comes from Aisha Kandisha. She was a goddess until modern religions rewrote her story. She may also be another reiteration of Ishtar or Easter. She has so many names in so many cultures and languages. Anyways, that opening scene aside, there are some things I like about this movie. Like this random guy singing the theme song to Pet Sematary at the party on the roof. It was just so random and funny. I actually thought this was going to be more like the Queen of Spades Dark Rite, but it ended up being more like Candyman. There's a lot of things that would remind you of Candyman, like the opening scene of the overhead shot of the city and the apartment buildings. Like you immediately think of that opening shot in Candyman of the cityscape in the highway. The connection to graffiti, also another thing that was a very strong element in Candyman. The kids have to say her name 5 times. And the connection to mirrors. Really, when you think about it, Candyman is a modern Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary is the real OG of monsters. Or Kandisha, or Kuntilanak, or whatever other names that she's called in other countries, because it seems like this legend is something that is very common throughout the world, just by different names. Do you find that interesting? I find it interesting. Anyways, this movie has some great gore scenes. There are some people that get hurt that had nothing to do with what the other kids did. Some of the kids called Aisha Kandisha, and then other kids were killed even though they had nothing to do with her being called, but it's mostly because she kind of has this thing for taking out men, and those kids had the unfortunate circumstance of having been born male. Aside from, I would say if you fast forward the first 3 minutes of this movie to where you don't have to hear, you know, that stupid diner conversation, you would really fully enjoy this movie without that. Like, I don't know why in the very first 3 minutes they had that little conversation calling each other racialized names. It didn't come back up in the story. It didn't have any purpose towards the resolution of the movie, so I don't know why it was there. Fast forward past those 3 minutes, you have a pretty solid movie, especially with some of the gore. Like, there's some really great gore in this movie, and I would love to see her come back because her creature design is great. Like, look at this creature design. Let's see if I'm gonna find a still to insert into this, or if I can find video to insert into this so you can see her creature design is really cool. And I would love to see sequels to this movie, but made with more care in how the characters interact with each other and how they speak to each other. With that said, I think this was a pretty good double feature. For scares, Kandisha is a little bit scarier and creepier than Kuntilanak, but both were fun movies and I was never bored. But like I always say, don't take my word for it, watch them for yourselves. Kuntilanak is on Netflix at the time of this recording, and Kandisha is on Shudder. And I say that because, like I always say, don't take my word for it. Watch it for yourself. Just because I love something doesn't mean you won't hate it, and just because I hate something doesn't mean you won't love it. Have you seen Kuntilanak or any of the original Kuntilanak movies? And have you seen Kandisha? And are you familiar with their legends? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, bye. Hey, did you know that I work for tips now? You could hit me up on Venmo or Cash App. While I'm happy to receive the type of coin that jingles, I love to receive the type that folds. Somebody show these people where the subscribe button is. They don't know what they're doing.